the fourth in history Chief Information Officer. Welcome to the podcast, Suzette.
Yes, Suzette.
Thank you, gentlemen.
Welcome.
None of us is going to be good at everything. And you're really a great leader when you realize what you're good at and what you're not good at.
You know, the Stoics believe that the obstacle is the way.
And I think you do those things not by complaining, but by doing.
No, there's no problems. There's only opportunities. Welcome to the Opportunity Accelerators, the show where professionals at any stage can learn how to level up their career from those that have found success and have the scars to prove it. Our goal is for this show to provide business mentorship in a podcast, but we also touch on other topics in the tech industry, in particular, how we can close the tech skills gap in the US by creating more and better pathways to advanced tech careers. I'm Vince Verga, and speaking of smart people, I'm here with my friend, business partner, co-host, the guy who makes ordinary international men of mystery seem mundane, Justin Vianello. What's going on, Justin?
Thank you. Doing very well. Thank you. Doing very well.
Before I introduce our guest, there's somebody suspiciously absent from the pod today.
Casts a large shadow.
He casts a larger shadow when he's here.
Yes.
So, tip of the cap to Joe Mitchell. You are missed. So, today, we're excited to be speaking with Suzette Kent. Suzette grew up in small town Leesville, Louisiana. She went on to earn a journalism degree from LSU. I believe that school has a football program. Is that right, Suzette?
A little one. A few sports
Upon
programs.
graduation from
What
was that?
A few sports programs, as a matter of fact. And if we run out of time, I would be happy to go through them all.
Well, I think we should talk about that later for sure. So upon graduation from LSU, Suzette started her career at Accenture and quickly earned her way to partner, where she became a tech and banking expert. She then went on to become a managing director at JP Morgan. After JP Morgan, she was tapped to lead the financial services practice as principal at Ernst & Young. In 2018, Suzette was appointed to be the fourth in history Chief Information Officer of the United States and was the first woman to serve in that role. Most notably, Suzette built her incredibly impressive career while raising twin boys as a single mother. Currently, Suzette serves as a board member and advisor to a number of organizations, including McKinsey, Rubrik, UiPath, and her alma mater, LSU, among others. And I'm extremely proud and humbled to say that Suzette is the advisory board chair for our company, Skillstorm, where over the past several years, she has been instrumental in helping us pursue our purpose of accelerating opportunities for our clients and thousands of stormers. So welcome to the podcast, Suzette.
Yes, Suzette.
Thank you, gentlemen.
Welcome. Great to see you.
Well, Justin, why don't you get things kicked off?
So, Suzette, it's been an absolute pleasure getting to know you over the last 3 years. And we've shared some interesting stories and probably learned a lot about each other. Now, I know you grew up in a small town in Louisiana, and I've actually had the privilege of visiting Louisiana with you and meeting some of the people that you grew up with. Wonderful people. And so I'm just interested to know, how did your upbringing in the small town in Louisiana, how did it shape the person you are today? And how did that drive the motivation to achieve the highest ranks within government and within industry?
I'll start with the kind of the personal and then do the business. You know, on the personal side, maybe like many of the folks listening, when you grow up in a small town, I was hungry to learn more, to see more, to travel the world, to experience different cultures. And those, those were not abundant in my small town in Louisiana. So some of the things that set me on a professional, path of curiosity and problem solving and genuine excitement about the technology industry, happened kind of in that small town. On the personal side, the great thing about small towns is that people do know you and they care about you, and you build long-lasting relationships. And in many cases, they keep you very humble and down to earth. I joke with people, even when I was the Federal CIO, I was my mom's printer tech support, never goes away. And so, that foundation of kind of small town connections and friends is always there. So it's maybe not as scary or daunting, to go out and tackle challenges, because you've got a really solid, base and foundation.
Did you, compared to the people that you knew, and obviously you had this desire to learn more and travel and, have this tremendous ambition for your life. When did you notice that may have been different than, some of the other people you were growing up around? Or did you notice?
On a good side, I have a group of friends. There's 8 of us, but 7 of us have been, the other 7, we've been friends since we were 6 years old. They even still joke with me about, I always wanted to fix things or understand, how to get something right. And in our, early days, I was a leader in high school. I was the president of our class and the valedictorian. I went to LSU, and it was at student government and sorority president as a sophomore. Actually, the leaders in the student government, when I was at LSU, that I worked very closely with, one is now our new Speaker of the House, or potentially going to be a Speaker of the House. But even in many of those, the companies, when I started, you read about, I graduated in journalism. I actually went to college with the intent of following a medical path. I went to college in biochemistry. I went on a biochemistry scholarship. And when I started doing some of my volunteer work, I realized that losing a patient and watching not being able to solve those problems was something that was kind of hard for me to handle. And I had a minor in Latin and psychology, and economics was actually what I was really interested in. And at that time at LSU, journalism, advertising was actually in the College of Journalism. And so I kind of put all those different things together. And the way I ended up in tech was that it was all about graphic design and, using media plans and data and how you represent ideas in images and graphically, and how you deliver messages in different forums. And sometimes people look and say, how could you end up, in tech when you started in journalism? But if you think about those core skills, they're what we're doing today, right? We went into, the cyber side, but at a later point in time, but understanding who you're serving and how you deliver information and, all those kinds of things. So I ended up in a path of wanting, to lead because I wanted to solve problems, and I wanted people, it sounds kind of trite, but, to have a better way, a better path. And I think you do those things not by complaining, but by doing. And so, and the last thing I would say, if you look at that journey, a lot of it's about maintaining relationships as well. The people that I have been friends with along their journey, I can honestly say I'm still friends with most of them, from the point that I met them. And the some of the senior roles and leadership roles came from maintaining those relationships.
Yeah. So it's interesting. I didn't realize that, you've been a leader since high school, right? So you said class president, and then, you were had leadership roles at LSU. What did you learn from that experience? Because I think a lot of people hesitate to put them out there for those types of things when they're young, because they assume that the other people that are going after these things know what they're doing. So they're hesitant to even take the chance to begin with. What advice would you give somebody when they're young to get over that fear of, it's kind of imposter syndrome in a way, right? Like they might feel like they might not want to belong. They might not belong there, but if they're smart, they'll figure it out. What are your thoughts on that?
Um, it's funny, and especially after I was in DC, I got asked some questions like this. I'd always focus on what's the thing that I can do? What's the contribution that I can make? None of us is going to be good at everything. And you're really a great leader when you realize what you're good at and what you're not good at. And you get other people, involved with you and in the mix that creates that diversity of skill, and you kind of fill each other's gaps. But building a great team is a leadership skill, in itself. And so in a lot of those places, I'll tell this is a funny story for listeners. When I actually ran for class president, I've shared this with people before. I was very involved in math and science, and I had competed in math and science since 8th grade, and that gave me a great opportunity to travel all over the United States, representing the state of Louisiana, and doing that at a very early age made me very involved. But we had at that point in time, this is a little bit way back when, but we had a teacher who I told him, I'm going to run for president or vice president of the math and science club. And he said, oh no, that position's reserved for men. And I didn't even know what to think. I thought it was a joke. I was like, very funny. He's like, no, I'm serious. These are the two people who are going to be, one of these two people is going to be in each of these roles. And I was so frustrated. I said, fine, I'm going to run for president of the class and student council. And it, I don't want to say it was a negative motivation, but it was the first time that somebody had ever told me you can't do something. And you can't do something for a reason that was completely outside of your control. But I also thought about what makes me different and what could I bring that's different, that would actually be, interesting to people. And those are still some of the discussions. When I went to DC as Federal CIO, there were many who looked at my background and said, oh, she's not a PhD in anything, and her background is not in computer science. But in the conversations, I said to them, and that's one of the things that I really love about Skillstorm. I said, but I've done the work. I've done more than 30 mergers in financial institutions. I have patents for products that didn't exist and came up with the idea and built those with software companies. I worked with every major software company, and particularly in banking. At a point in time, I had implemented to or from every single system around the world. And I'd worked, all over the world. And banking has a very high bar. And, so, I said, look, I may not have the academic pedigree that you're looking for, but I've done the work and I've had the experiences, and I'll go toe to toe with anybody that you want to talk. That you want to, bring up. And many of those things, proved out to be true, especially when you're building policy or writing new law. You have to understand how things are really going to work, not just a case study.
Yeah. That's amazing.
So, Suzette, I'm actually going to sort of go back after this question to some of the earlier experiences in your career, but I just want to jump in on that point. Do you believe we need more people in government who have private sector experience?
Absolutely. Just part of the reason I am still involved in government is that we need people who are deeply experienced with how our industries work, with how regulations work, with how American people consume services. Because if you don't understand those things, we continue to miss the ball. And I won't, bore folks on here, but I can point to lots of regulation that on paper sounded like a good idea. But when you practically apply that in a working environment, whether it's for energy or transportation or USDA, for farming, it doesn't work. And, we know one of the things with digital delivery now, it's kind of funny. We have to have a policy that says write federal websites in plain language so that people can understand them. Don't write them like a lawyer. Um, I think that people who are in private sector understand that. I also saw, and Emily may have said this, but she and I shared a level of urgency. When you're,
Mm.
I think coming from the private sector, whether it is focus on results delivery, whether it's someone who's working quarter to quarter, whether it's someone who has grown up in a culture where they have either a sales number or a recruitment objective or whatever those things are, there's hard and fast measures of expected performance. There is also, if your customer or your end consumer doesn't like the services you deliver, they leave. So it's a different kind of thing. And in government, we can't decide, I don't like how that tax payment process works. I'm not going to pay my taxes. So
Unfortunately.
yeah, that's a long-winded answer, Justin, but I tried to go around the horn.
Yeah, well, that, and gaining all that real world experience started, when you graduated with your journalism degree from LSU. Can you talk to us? And then you get the job at Accenture and quickly work your way up to partner. It is probably a pretty unlikely journey for most people, but can you share with us maybe some pivotal moments or some critical decisions that you made with your career early on, or the way you thought about things that, that helped you advance so quickly?
Yeah. I was thinking back, kind of funny. When I started, I was the only liberal arts major. So everyone else was engineering or computer science when I started with Accenture. And the reason I went into consulting and I was really excited about it was I knew that they invested in your education, but also I liked every single industry, and I wanted to try out lots of different industries. And I thought, all right, consulting is a place that I could do that. And I worked in oil and gas. Yeah, it wasn't the industry I wanted to be in long term. Obviously in Louisiana, that was a big important industry. I worked with retail. I worked with state and local government. One of the first things that one of the projects I worked on was actually how to connect the financial services system and child welfare system to find parents who weren't paying, child support. And from those experiences, someone said, "Hey, you've learned all this stuff about banking. Why don't you come over and work on this banking project?" And I loved it. I absolutely, loved it then. And at that point, and this is really kind of long, dating my experience, but we didn't have national banking in the United States. Every bank was state chartered. So although we were implementing lots of different technology, we also operationally had to figure out how to put these big businesses together and how to give customers a common experience. That was a turning point for me from learning about industries where I like this, right? I like where this is going. And then we started online banking. And I had some really cool experiences working with what was then Nations Bank. And that point in time, the CEO was Hugh McCall, putting together Bank of America. And that's where I did, I lived all over the United States doing those, different M&As. And what I, learned, Hugh had this vision of get 80% of it right. We'll figure out, the other 20%, but being first to market, being innovative, getting something new and different out there that's compelling matters a lot. And that first mover advantage. And, I got to see that and see how that happened around the United States. I'll go back to also relationships and teams. The reason of all those people I started with, I was the only person who made partner. And at a point in time, I was the only female partner in an area of the country. But it was staying focused on what we were achieving for our clients. And that was really exciting. And that turning point, the turning point for me, and the way that I stayed, I loved the work we were doing technically, and I liked the business impact that we were making in the world. And the funny thing, and the way I ended up at JP Morgan was some of those exact same people when Jamie wanted to do their international expansion. So I'd worked with them at Bank One, actually deploying all the front, when we stopped moving documents around, all the imaging at the front counter. And they said, hey, we want to expand into 17 different countries and 65 currencies. You interested in doing that? And I thought, you know what? That hadn't been done before. I am interested. And so all of those pieces were being really excited about the work and being really focused on what it takes to get it done well.
So, Suzette, you and I share something in common. We both have twins, right? And I know how hard it is dealing with twins and managing twins. And so you were a single mom when your twin boys were born, and you had a career. And I know how hard it is, and how hard it is certainly for Liz to manage our twins. So I'm just intrigued to know, how did you balance that? How did you manage having twin baby boys and a career, and the juggle between that, juggling your personal life and your ambition and your career trajectory? I'd love to hear how you manage that.
Yeah. And Vince asked the question about some of the things I'm proud of. I'm proud of some of the things that happened at that point in time. And I have to say, I was a true single mom for 13 years. That early part, my husband was in the military and deployed. So my husband deployed when my kids were 3 months old, and didn't see him again until they were 9 months old. And, then after that became longer. So being present with my children was really important to me. And so I was very vocal about it. And as you might imagine, at that point in time, and for a consultant, it was very strange for someone to say, hey, I have 2 infants and I'm going to take them with me on this project. They were like, that's crazy. We don't have any policy for that. And I said, well, you let people fly home every weekend. What if I just fly home every other weekend? And instead of staying in the fancy apartments that you have downtown for the project team, what if I stay a little bit further out so I can have, an apartment that's near where I have, childcare? And what about if at some points in time, I actually worked the testing night shift. Anybody who's listening to this, back when banks used to run, and they still do, third shift, I chose and asked to run the night shift for all of the testing that we would do on the systems, so that I could spend more time with my kids during the day. And I got to see how every single system worked, and when it broke, how to fix it and what went on. So I thought about what life I wanted my children to have, and tried to arrange my professional life around that. And at points in time, I asked questions and asked to do things that hadn't been done before, but I would always go in with not just, hey, can I fly? I need a second seat, right? To fly back and forth each time. But I walked in with something that I wanted to give. I'll only go home every other weekend, but I need you to allow the policy to buy 2 seats. I worked overseas in Asia and Europe quite a bit. And particularly when I was with JP Morgan and I had large development teams over there, I would plan it during the summer. So instead of going every other month for a couple of weeks, I'd say, hey, I'll go for 2 months, but I'm taking my kids with me.
I was listening to a podcast a couple of weeks ago. There's a gentleman named Ryan Holiday. He's an author, and he has, social media and stuff. I think he's called the modern day Stoic or something like that. But he studies the Stoics. And one of the things that he was talking about is, the Stoics believe that the obstacle is the way. Like that is the whole point, right? It's not supposed to be easy. You're supposed to have
Right.
things that you need to overcome. That's what makes life worth living. So,
Yes.
and you're the perfect example of that.
Yeah, and I look at that story, and what stands out, and I actually was writing it down as you were talking. Interesting, similar to what Vince said. You came forward with solutions, not problems or demands, right? And so often we see this. I have this situation, therefore I am entitled to this. Your approach was very much how do I compromise and how do I find a solution that works for everyone. So on that theme is that as you transitioned from these roles in the private sector into a government role, how did you make that decision to make that change? And how did you use some of your experiences from the private sector when you were in that role?
I will tell you, it was a long and thoughtful decision, and it was something I never expected. As a matter of fact, when the conversation started, I had never even thought about serving in government. But my husband is military service. Many members of my family have been military, and service was really important. And when you're asked to serve, I think if you can contribute something, you do it. So, I relocated, to Washington, D.C., and I thought about it the same way that I thought about a consulting engagement, with a client. What's the most important thing? What do you expect me to do? How are you going to measure, that successful outcome? And what are the pieces and parts that I have to work with? And, one of the things that, came from the president was I want all the technology policy updated. We want real impact, in these areas, and run it like a business. And so when I came in, I inventoried the policy. Some of it hadn't been updated in 8 to 10 years, and said, okay, we're going to get all this updated. And we did, put it on a schedule, worked with the team. The other thing, but doing that is not just a mechanical thing. It required this working with the CIOs of every single one of the federal agencies and building relationships. And, and many of them are like, who the hell is this? And where did she come from? And what's this going to be about? So it was about building relationships, and getting them to the table to deliver their expertise about why a policy that works for USDA and Department of Labor, who are on the ground every day, might not work for NASA or Space Force, because they can't update their technology in the same way. Cybersecurity rules that work for someone in, like, at the FDIC or the Department of Treasury don't necessarily work for the State Department or USAID, where we have to let. So kind of had to bring the experts in and rethink those things. The other part of it that, quite frankly, Justin, I was not really ready for or didn't understand, was when I said, what are those metrics? What do they look like? They weren't there in the same way in government. There wasn't I've said before, there wasn't a carrot or a stick, right? If you didn't meet something and achieve a certain thing, nothing really happened. If you hit the ball out of the park, sometimes, that was great for citizens, but also it didn't necessarily change the dynamic, every day. So that was incredibly strange. So we had to create, metrics and milestones. And then one of the other things, to run it like a business, I looked around and said, agencies don't even have common email, and we don't have collaboration tools. And we aren't all connected to the same cyber dashboard. Those are going to be priorities. So back to how did I looked and said, in our in our federal government, the technology space, we spend over $1 billion and there's 90,000 professionals. There is no shortage of problems to solve. But I had to say, this is what we're going to focus on. And getting agreement on what we were going to focus on and clarity. And, you don't want to tell somebody their problem isn't important, but this is what we're going to do. Was a really big deal. And because all the agencies agreed and because we moved in massive, unison towards those things, when the pandemic hit, we were able to turn the largest workforce in the world virtual in a very quick time. We used the council, we used the CIOs, we used the CISOs. We met multiple times a day, but because we'd made those investments and tracked that everybody had collaboration tools, that everyone had common email, that we had secure delivery system or secure access and secure delivery systems, we were able to work in an environment that no one ever expected. So, all those things were absolutely fantastic.
So Suzette, talk to us about how that transition happened. Like, did you receive a phone call saying, hey, we'd love you to take on this role? I'm just intrigued at how, someone who has senior role within industry, all of a sudden transitions, well, when I say all of a sudden, I know I'm abbreviating, but transitions into that type of role. How did that happen?
I got a phone call on November 23rd, right before Thanksgiving, and said, would you accept this nomination? And at first I kind of laughed. I'm like, what? Really? So I had all of Thanksgiving to talk to my family about it, because it did mean, moving to DC, and it did mean some things that were very different. Being very blunt as well, many know the roles in government are not financially lucrative there. So that was a big thing. I was in an amazing role. And this was truly going to be service, right? And I had, we had to support that as our family. So then after that was about every kind of background check and all those things that could happen. I'd been an insider in companies and been an officer whose financials were public. So I had security clearances and all that kind of stuff. So I was like, there's nothing, I'm clean, nothing you're going to find, but it was still a very onerous process. And the day that the president made the nomination, I was actually on an airplane. And I knew it was going to be a certain time, but there's a White House protocol, process. So you kind of don't know when the president's going to have time and all that kind of stuff. And so it all actually happened when I was on an airplane. So, when I landed, it was on my phone. I was like, well, I guess this is really going.
Here we go.
So Suzette, one last question on this. The one thing that I found so interesting about working with you is you have managed to maintain, I won't say you've managed, you have really good relationships on both sides of the political spectrum, right? And in a world that is so politically polarized, I found it fascinating how you're able to balance that and how you're able to maintain the relationships that you have with people of very different political backgrounds. We've actually been in meetings where, people who I would argue probably, have a particular political position greet you like you're a family member. And so I just found that intriguing. How did you balance that in, DC, in a world that is so politically polarizing? How do you balance the ability to maintain these amazing relationships with people of every background and every political persuasion?
That's a great question. It starts back in that Louisiana, right? One of my best friends from the point that I was 6, is probably, in a very different place, and people will see us together and they're like, what do you two, you two hang out together? We're like, well, when you're 6, you just, care about, what's for lunch and playing and, relationships. No, but Justin, it's a great question, but it's really important to getting things done at the core. If you can keep asking questions and really crystallize what people are trying to do, especially in technology, they really aren't that vastly different. And, I stayed very focused on results and what delivers, results, whether it's for citizens, patients, veterans, warfighters, or for the employees, in the federal government. And both sides want to get good things done. The way they get there, and the rules and the way they think about it and the processes are different. But if we can get to clarity on the results, that's one. The second is communication. And one of the things when I went in, I actually said, I'm not really partisan, right? What we had to do was for the good of our nation, for homeland security, for privacy, to protect the privacy of American citizens, for the efficiency of how we spend taxpayer dollars. Those things have no political party, right? Those are just the right things to do. But when I was asked to brief someone, I'd say, I'll brief anyone who wants to come, but the invitation has to go out to everybody. I'll have, open conversations. Anybody is welcome to come. I would ask, can I come, and talk to you? And wait, why don't we have, all these people involved? Who is at the table? Do we have all the right people at the table? Because, get the objective right and keep the communication flowing was, really important. And I've been asked to testify to Congress a couple of times, and I was one of the last times. It was actually funny because both sides said, you could have been a witness for either side. I'm like, because I'm just talking about facts. There is no side to facts. And that was really, really important in government. It's important in everything. But at this point in time in our lives and in the situations in government, it's absolutely essential to getting something done.
Yeah. So, Suzette, I know one of the big challenges that you experienced when you were CIO that we've discussed before, and, it obviously remains a challenge. It would be remiss of us, I think, not to discuss it, which is the tech skills gap. So, when you were CIO, what challenges did you see? What problems were being created because of this tech skills gap? And maybe talk about some of the things you did to address it. And then, what is the situation today? Is it getting better or worse? And I know that there's been some movement recently to do some things sort of structurally to help solve that problem. So just like to get your perspective on that. What is the essence of the problem? Even though we know there's no problems, there's only opportunities. But what is the essence of the challenge, and what are some of the thoughts that you have that the government and the private sector can maybe do together to help solve it?
Yeah. So I'm going to start with something, and you and Justin know this, and Joe, because we've talked about it passionately. Part of the reason I'm so thrilled to work with Skillstorm is that I think Skillstorm gets all the pieces of the problem and brings how do you solve it, all together. The right people, the right skill sets, connecting, with employers. In the federal government, there were there were many different things, and let's go back to those, facts. You have, like I said, a 90,000 person workforce where the average age is 56. You have an average ongoing training budget of less than $500. You have, other than cybersecurity, where the average tenure is only 18 months, you have very long tenured people. And that's actually part of the value proposition of, federal workforce: mission and feeling like you're doing something really important, and retirement, so to get to that retirement, you have to be there at least 20 years. So you put the combination of all those facts together, and what you end up with is people who understand the mission and they're very passionate, but they haven't necessarily had, opportunities to continue to build and develop particularly new skills when we see things like AI and automation and, I can keep going, but also new platforms and, low code, no code, the way you develop, in new platforms, the importance of data and the protocols and disciplines around data. Those aren't things that they were necessarily exposed to. We also have a government hiring system that was based on very old, antiquated resumes. Anybody can go out and look at, USA Jobs and see that. But also, even the process to update a job family is 2 to 3 years inside the federal government. What somebody in technology does could change every 6 months, right? It's not nimble.
Right.
And, it was built, and many things were built when technology wasn't even a thing. This is also a fact. There wasn't even a job family for data scientists in the federal government when I was there. We created a notional one so that we could hire them. They were hiring them into project manager roles because it was the closest thing to fit. Someone who has a discipline and understands the has invested in gaining the skills important to that career. Don't want to be called project manager, but anyway, so what I saw is a system that wasn't necessarily supportive of bringing in diversity, of timely update and enhancement of skills. Yet those were the systems we were implementing. And so many of the agencies, in order to use newer technology, had to rely very heavily on consulting partners or people that, came in from the outside to get those skills. And they had to battle. DC is very expensive. And even though the federal government is everywhere, a lot of the tech folks sit in DC. The skill rates or the job salaries were sometimes lower than market. So you had a whole bunch of factors that made it difficult. But what did they have? They had a passion for mission, and they had deep expertise around the business processes. So one of the things that we did, I had a hypothesis that we could reskill people that already had the business skills and the security clearances with modern technology capabilities. And we were able to do that. We were able to do that while they were on the job, and then, put those people back into roles. And, what we spent on training was 1/3 of what we would have spent to recruit and bring in a new person. Again, that's back to why, I believe in the model. I also saw every single day how people who had certain, certifications, and they had a disciplined process of going through platform training, how effective they were, on the job, and how much more quickly that moved agencies to achieve the objectives. Justin mentioned, some of the other, things that I do. And I know we've talked about legislation to push hiring and make sure that, certification and skills-based hiring, it has to be part of the way that we build our federal workforce, because the gap is too big. The gap is too big. And the results that are delivered are fantastic. So, that was workforce, and workforce development was one of the main priorities that I had when I was in government. And it's obviously one of the main priorities I still have outside, because, by the way, it's not just we just talked about in government, but it is actually for our nation. If we are not technically competitive globally, that creates economic, homeland security, and privacy challenges that aren't aligned with our ideals.
Yep, no doubt. Well, it is, it's a huge problem, and I absolutely can't tell you how much we appreciate all that you've done working with us to help try to solve it. And excited about the work that we're doing and making a lot of progress, and taking those problems and turning them into opportunities. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Justin.
Yes. Well,
here we go. Famous lightning round.
Here we go, Suzette. This is a lightning round. Here we go. First question. Question number 1. Favorite animal?
Tiger.
No, I thought it would be. Have you ever been on a reality show?
No. Unless you count government.
Do you believe in ghosts? Yeah.
I'm undecided.
Do you believe in ghosts?
I'm undecided.
Undecided? Okay. Favorite place to visit?
The Bahamas.
If you lost a bet, would you pay the person?
Yes.
Mm-hmm. Listen,
take
John.
note, Joe Mitchell. Take note.
Do you have a bucket list?
Yes.
Would your 12-year-old self think you cool?
I have no idea.
Oh, for sure.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah.
Definitely. Do you think El Dorado really exists?
What?
Do you think El Dorado really exists?
Like the car?
No, like the city of gold.
Oh. I think it was based on.
I ask all the tough questions.
I think there's an Aztec city of gold. There was an Aztec city of gold somewhere.
Yeah, I ask all the tough questions. Favorite sports team?
LSU.
What mythical creature do you believe is real?
I'm always convinced the dragon's going to show up somewhere, like Loch Ness Monster.
All right. Finish the sentence. Vince Verga is.
Vince
you only have 5 seconds.
Enigmatic.
Live wire. It's a live wire.
I'll take it.
All right. Do you know how to perform a magic trick?
No.
I know you can perform card tricks. Do magic. Do you contemplate life?
Yes.
Which word is better, yogi or swami?
Swami.
All right.
I thought you were going to go with yogi. All right. End of the lightning round. We'll have to unpack that at the next board meeting. Yeah.
Well, thank you again, Suzette. And, I'll let Justin close out. But, I just wanted to say again that, what an honor it's been to work with you and have the opportunity to learn from you, and super excited about the future. So then thank you for being our guest today.
Yes, Suzette, it's always a pleasure talking to you. And as I say, you and I share some similar experiences, especially of late. And it's always wonderful talking to you about your experiences. You're very honest and open about it. You have the ability to maintain amazing relationships. And I've had the pleasure of spending time with you, and I know what a wonderful person you are. So thank you for the time that you've given to us to be on this podcast. And we're excited to follow up on it at some stage.
Well, thanks, Chet. It's an honor to work with y'all and the whole Skillstorm team.
Thank you. All right.
Thank you.
This episode of Opportunity Accelerators has been brought to you by Skillstorm, where our purpose as an organization is to launch and accelerate tech careers. Please be sure to like and subscribe to catch the next episode.